Think of that moment when the glass slipper finally fits the triumphant music swelling, the fairy godmother's magic realized, and Cinderella's life transformed forever. It's one of the most iconic scenes in storytelling, a moment so deeply embedded in our collective imagination that it feels almost timeless. You've probably grown up with this tale, watching the Disney animation or reading the Brothers Grimm version, believing you know exactly where it came from. But what if I told you that this story doesn't belong to any one time, place, or culture? What if the origins of Cinderella are far older, more mysterious, and more extraordinary than anything we've been led to believe? This isn't just a fairy tale. It's a historical puzzle that spans thousands of years and reaches across continents, from the crowded marketplaces of ancient Egypt to the imperial courts of 9th century China. Long before Walt Disney brought it to the silver screen, and even centuries before the Brothers Grimm collected their version, variations of this story were already being whispered beside firesides, written on fragile scrolls, and performed in bustling town squares. The tale of a kind-hearted girl, oppressed by those around her, who rises above her circumstances through virtue and a little bit of magic, is a narrative so powerful and pervasive that it seems to echo through human history itself. So how did this story travel such vast distances and endure for so long? Who was the first person to dream up a slipper that changes everything? And why does this particular story speak to something so universal within us? Together, we're going to trace the footsteps of this beloved fairy tale back through time, peeling away the layers of adaptation and interpretation to reveal its astonishing ancient origins. This is a journey into the heart of one of humanity's most enduring myths, a quest not just for answers, but for the deeper truths about why we tell stories, what they say about us, and how a simple tale of hope and transformation continues to captivate us generation after generation. But to truly begin our search, we first need to know exactly what we're looking for. What are the essential ingredients that make a story a Cinderella story? It's more than just a girl and a shoe. It's a specific recipe of hope, injustice, and magical triumph that resonates across time. By defining this core archetype, we create a framework, a kind of story detective's toolkit that will allow us to identify its ancient relatives hiding in plain sight within the folklore of the world. At the heart of every true variant lies our persecuted heroine. She isn't just having a bad day, she is fundamentally oppressed within her own home, often by a stepmother or stepsisters who relegate her to a life of demeaning labor. Despite this cruelty, her defining characteristic is her innate virtue. Her kindness, patience, and gentle nature remain unbroken. This central contrast between her internal goodness and her external circumstances is the engine of the entire tale. Then comes the catalyst, magical assistance. This heroine does not fight her way out with brute force. Instead, supernatural aid intervenes on her behalf. Whether it's a fairy godmother, a talking animal, the spirit of a deceased mother, or a magical tree, this force provides her with the means to temporarily transcend her social status. The transformation is almost always spectacular, involving a magnificent gown, a coach, and most famously, exquisite footwear. This moment is pure wish fulfillment, the magical solution to an otherwise impossible situation. This leads to the pivotal event, a celebration where she is seen. She attends a ball, a festival, or a religious ceremony, capturing the attention of everyone, especially a high-status figure like a prince or a king. But there's a catch, a strict time limit on the magic. Her hurried departure creates the story's most iconic plot point, the loss of a single item, most commonly a shoe, which becomes the key to her identity. Which brings us to the climax, recognition through that object. A search is launched, and the unique item is tried on all the women in the land until it fits only our heroine, proving her true identity and worth. This is where the glass slipper does its perfect work. It is an undeniable, objective test of her unique quality that her oppressors cannot argue against. Finally, the resolution, virtue rewarded through a royal marriage. Her goodness is validated not just by love, but by a profound elevation in social status. She is lifted from the ashes of the hearth to the heights of the palace, achieving a happily ever after that serves as the ultimate poetic justice against those who mistreated her. It is this complete narrative cycle: persecution, magic, transformation, recognition, and reward that forms the powerful archetype we will now track across centuries and continents. So where does our search for this archetype actually begin? If we rewind the clock of history as far back as written records allow, we find ourselves not in the forests of Germany with the brothers Grimm, nor in the French salons of Charles Perrault, but standing on the sun-baked banks of the Nile River in ancient Egypt. Our first documented Cinderella figure emerges from the dust of the 1st century BC, and her name was Rhodopis. Her story was recorded by the Greek geographer and historian Strabo, and it presents a fascinatingly raw, early blueprint of the tale we know today. According to Strabo, Rhodopis was not Egyptian by birth. She was a Thracian Greek woman living in Egypt as a slave. Historical context is crucial here. This was a period when Egypt was under the rule of the Ptolemaic dynasty, a line of Greek-speaking pharaohs descended from one of Alexander the Great's generals. Greek culture and people were deeply interwoven with the native Egyptian population, creating a unique Greco-Egyptian society. Rhodopis, a slave in this world, was said to work alongside another well-known storyteller of the ancient world, Aesop, the famous fabulist. While her beauty was often noted, it was an utterly bizarre incident that truly set her story in motion. The tale goes that one day, while Rhodopis was bathing in a river, an eagle, the sacred animal of the god Zeus, swooped down from the sky. It snatched one of her sandals, which was reportedly gilded with beautiful rose-red gold, and flew away. The eagle carried this delicate shoe a great distance, all the way to the bustling city of Memphis, where the pharaoh was holding court. In a moment of divine, or perhaps simply astonishing coincidence, the eagle dropped the sandal directly into the pharaoh's lap. The pharaoh, profoundly struck by this strange event and the exquisite craftsmanship of the tiny sandal, interpreted it as nothing less than a sign from the gods themselves. He saw it as a divine omen, a command to find the woman to whom this beautiful object belonged. He immediately sent his servants out across the land, instructing them to have every young woman in the kingdom try on the sandal. Their quest, much like the prince's in later versions, was one of royal decree. After a long search, they finally found Rhodopis. The sandal fit her perfectly, and the pharaoh, upon seeing her, was so captivated that he made her his wife, elevating her from her life of servitude to become the queen of Egypt. Now, let's hold this ancient account up against our Cinderella archetype. We have our persecuted heroine, a slave, an outsider in a foreign land. We have the magical intervention, though here it's not a fairy's wand but the act of a divine eagle, a creature straight out of myth and portent. We have the lost item of footwear, a single rose-gilded sandal instead of a glass slipper. We have the royal figure who becomes obsessed with finding its owner. And we have the ultimate reward, a royal marriage that completely transforms her social standing. The core DNA of the story is all there, etched in a 2,000-year-old historical text. It's a powerful reminder that the yearning for a twist of fate that rewards goodness and virtue is a human constant, as relevant to a Greek historian writing about Egypt as it is to us today. But the story of Rhodopis doesn't end with Strabo. A few centuries later, another ancient writer, a Roman author named Aelian, offered a slightly different version of events. In his telling, the eagle wasn't just a random bird of prey. It was a deliberate agent of the god Horus, acting with clear intention. This subtle shift moves the narrative even closer to the magical intervention we recognize, transforming a bizarre coincidence into a purposeful act of divine will. However, the real historical intrigue deepens when we discover that the name Rhodopis wasn't just a character invented for a folktale. She appears in the writings of the famed historian Herodotus, who chronicled the Greco-Persian Wars centuries before Strabo. The Rhodopis mentioned by Herodotus was a very real person, a celebrated and famously beautiful hetera or courtesan who lived during the 6th century BC. According to his accounts, she was a slave on the island of Samos, owned by the brother of the poet Sappho, and she eventually earned enough money to buy her freedom and relocate to Egypt. Herodotus even mentions a wildly extravagant story that she paid for the construction of one of the pyramids, a tale he immediately dismisses as popular nonsense, but one that illustrates just how large she loomed in the popular imagination. So what are we to make of this? Did a folktale simply borrow the name of a famous historical figure, attaching a whimsical story to a well-known name to give it more weight? Or did the extraordinary life of a real woman, a slave who rose to immense wealth and fame, itself become the seed from which the folktale grew? This is where history and story intertwine in the most fascinating way. It's entirely plausible that over centuries, the remarkable biography of a real Rhodopis became embellished with mythical elements. The oral tradition has a powerful way of simplifying and symbolizing complex lives. Her journey from slavery to prominence could have been mythologized into a single, perfect, divine moment, an eagle delivering a sandal. The historical truth of her acquired wealth was replaced by the poetic justice of a royal marriage. This blending of fact and fiction is not a corruption of history, but rather a testament to the power of narrative. The human mind seems hardwired to reshape true events into archetypal patterns to find the fairy tale hidden within reality. The ancient Egyptian Cinderella, therefore, might be a beautiful palimpsest, a historical document where the erased lines of a real woman's life still show through the ink of a wonderful, enduring story. While the story of Rhodopis offers a glimpse into the ancient Mediterranean world, our search for Cinderella's origins now takes a dramatic leap eastward, across vast deserts and mountain ranges, to one of the most dazzling and sophisticated empires in human history, Tang Dynasty China. Here in the 9th century, a government official and scholar named Duan Chengxi wrote down a story in a collection of miscellaneous notes called Yaoyong Zazu. This was not a book of fairy tales for children. It was a serious work of jottings meant for a literate, educated audience, which makes the story it contains all the more astonishing. Duan claimed he heard it from an old servant who had traveled in the region of southern China and Vietnam, and the tale he recorded, Xian, is the most complete and beautifully detailed early Cinderella variant we possess, predating the European versions by nearly 1,000 years. Our heroine, Xian, is immediately sympathetic, yet her circumstances are even more heartbreaking than those of her Western counterparts. She is not merely mistreated by a stepmother, she is a true orphan, her own father having passed away, leaving her utterly vulnerable. Her stepmother, a woman named Jin, and her stepsister favor their own bloodline and force Xian into a life of brutal poverty, ordering her to perform dangerous tasks like collecting firewood from deep in the jungle and drawing water from treacherous pools. She is given only the barest rags to wear, her existence defined by relentless toil and sorrow. Yet, like all Cinderellas, her spirit remains unbroken. Her innate kindness and virtue shine through the grime of her oppression. Her magical helper arrives not in the form of a fairy, but from a creature she herself showed compassion to, a beautiful fish with golden eyes. Unbeknownst to her stepmother, Xian had been saving her own meager portions of food to feed this magnificent fish, which lived in a pond near their home. They developed a deep bond, and the fish would even rise to the surface to greet her, but her stepmother, suspicious and cruel, discovered the secret. In an act of truly vicious jealousy, she tricked the fish into appearing, caught it, killed it, cooked it, and served it for dinner. The brutality of this moment is stark, a far cry from the whimsy of a pumpkin coach. Xian is devastated, left with nothing but the bones of her only friend. This is where the magic truly begins. An old man, an ancestor's spirit perhaps, suddenly appears to Xian in her despair. He tells her not to grieve, for a powerful magic remains. He instructs her to retrieve the fish bones and hide them in her room, explaining that if she prays to them with a sincere heart, any wish she makes will be granted. This is a crucial distinction from the European magic, which is often a one-time gift. Xian's fish bones are a renewable source of enchantment, a direct line to benevolent power that she can access in her times of greatest need. It is a deeply personal and earned form of magic born from her own kindness and loss. Soon, the time for the local festival arrives, a grand cave festival where young people gather to find partners. Her stepmother and stepsister, adorned in fine clothes, leave for the celebration, ordering Xian to stay behind and guard the fruit trees in the garden. Alone and heartbroken, Xian turns to her fish bones. She wishes for clothes fit for the festival. Instantly, she is transformed. Duan Chengshi's description is wonderfully specific. Her robe is woven of kingfisher feathers, a symbol of immense value and beauty, and on her feet are a pair of stunning golden slippers. She heads to the festival, a radiant and unknown beauty, but her stepmother's suspicion is ever present. Fearing Xian might be there, she constantly glances around, forcing Xian to flee in a panic. In her hurried escape, she loses one of her golden slippers. She returns home, changes back into her rags, and pretends to have been sleeping by the trees all along, her heart pounding with a secret joy and the terror of almost being discovered. Meanwhile, the lost slipper is found by a villager and eventually makes its way, through a series of trades, into the hands of a powerful king who rules a nearby island kingdom. He is utterly captivated by this tiny, exquisitely crafted shoe. He becomes obsessed, launching a search for its owner. He places the shoe on display and orders every woman in the land to try it on. None can fit into the delicate golden slipper. The king's search intensifies, eventually leading his men to Xian's home. Her stepmother, seeing an opportunity for her own daughter, hides Xian in a pile of rubbish and presents her biological daughter. But the slipper, of course, does not fit. It is only when the king's men hear a whisper about another girl in the house that they discover Xian, dirty and dressed in rags. Skeptical but following orders, they ask her to try on the slipper. It fits perfectly. She then produces the matching slipper from her robes, and finally, she puts on the kingfisher feather gown, transforming before their eyes into the breathtaking beauty from the festival. The proof is undeniable. The king, overjoyed, takes Xian as his wife, lifting her from a life of misery to become his queen. In a final, darkly poetic twist of justice, the stepmother and stepsister are ultimately punished for their cruelty, sealed in a cave and crushed by a shower of flying stones, a far more severe fate than the simple shaming found in later European tales. The sophistication of this 9th century narrative is breathtaking. It contains every single element of our core Cinderella archetype, but it's rendered with a richer texture and cultural specificity. The magic is more personal and tied to sacrifice. The transformation is described with tangible, luxurious details. The resolution offers both magnificent reward and brutal, unambiguous justice. This was not a simple folk story. It was a literary account recorded by a scholar, suggesting the tale was already well developed and widely known across Asia. Xian stands as a monumental piece of evidence, proving that the Cinderella story was not birthed in the European imagination, but was already a mature and powerful narrative, traveling the Silk Road and captivating listeners in China centuries before it ever reached the courts of France. What makes the story of Xian so remarkable isn't just its early existence, but how it serves as a perfect mirror, reflecting the deepest values and anxieties of the society that nurtured it. This isn't a generic folk tale, it is a profoundly Chinese cultural artifact, and its details offer us a window into the world of the Tang dynasty. the most striking cultural element is the central role of filial piety, the cornerstone of Confucian social order. In European versions, Cinderella's goodness is often a general kindness. For Xian, her virtue is specifically expressed through her unwavering deference to her stepmother. Despite the horrific abuse, she never openly rebels or speaks out. Her patience and obedience in the face of injustice are presented as her greatest moral strengths, qualities that would have been immediately recognized and praised by a Chinese audience. Her ultimate reward is not just a marriage for love, but a divine validation of this Confucian ideal, the universe itself conspiring to lift up the truly filial child. Then there is the unavoidable symbol, the shoe. For Western listeners, the glass slipper is a symbol of unique beauty and a perfect fit. But in the context of Chinese culture, the tiny, exquisite golden slipper in Xian resonates with a much more complex and later practice, foot binding. While the story of Xian predates the widespread adoption of foot binding by centuries, the narrative powerfully prefigures its cultural significance. A tiny, delicate foot, and by extension the shoe that contains it, became the ultimate symbol of feminine beauty, aristocracy, and desirability. It was a mark of status, proving a woman did not need to perform manual labor. The king's obsession with Xian's lost slipper isn't just a plot device. It's a fascination with an object that signifies supreme refinement and elite status. The impossibility of anyone else wearing the shoe underscores Xian's unmatched quality, a theme that would later become physically literalized through the painful practice of binding. The setting of the transformation is equally significant. Xian's chance to escape her life occurs at a local cave festival. This was not a random ball thrown by a prince. It was a real type of gathering, a spring festival known as a Shangxi celebration, where young people from different villages would meet, socialize, and often find marriage partners. This grounding in a real, communal event makes the magic feel more tangible. The festival represents a sanctioned break from the rigid social hierarchy, a rare opportunity for social mobility and chance encounters. Her stepmother's desire to prevent her from going highlights how tightly controlled a young woman's life was. Attending such a festival was a crucial step in her life course, and denying her that opportunity was an attempt to cut her off from any future entirely. Finally, the nature of the magic itself is telling. Unlike the external, bestowed magic of a fairy godmother, Xian's power comes from within her own household, born from her compassion and nurtured by her ancestors. The magical fish bones are a relic of her kindness, and the old man who guides her is likely a manifestation of her ancestral spirit. This connects the magic directly to the Chinese spiritual worldview, where the line between the living and the dead is porous, and ancestors play an active role in guiding and protecting their virtuous descendants. Her reward is not just personal happiness, but the restoration of cosmic harmony, correcting the imbalance created by her stepmother's violation of familial duty. The story of Xian, therefore, is far more than a simple fairy tale. It is a complex narrative woven from the very fabric of its time, teaching lessons about virtue, reinforcing social norms, and offering a magical solution to the very real constraints of its world. Yet the journey of this story didn't end in the imperial courts of China. It continued to travel, carried by merchants along maritime trade routes and whispered by storytellers across the South China Sea, taking root and flourishing in the rich spiritual soil of Southeast Asia. Here, the Cinderella archetype was not simply retold, it was reimagined, absorbing the unique colors, creatures, and cosmologies of each culture it touched, transforming into something both familiar and wonderfully new. In the Philippines, we encounter the story of Mayang Alamango, or Mary the Crab. This version immediately grounds itself in the local environment. Our heroine is not a stepdaughter but an adopted one, mistreated by her jealous foster mother and foster sister. They force her to perform impossible tasks like filling a cracked water jar, hoping to see her fail. but Mariang Alamango's magic helper is not a fish or a fairy. It is, as her name suggests, a crab. In some tellings, she is kind to a crab she finds, and it repays her by using its natural abilities to help her complete her tasks. In other, more mystical versions, the crab is her true form. She is a powerful nature spirit, a Dewata, who merely appears as a lowly, mistreated girl. When her foster sister attempts to spy on her, she discovers Mariang Alamango has shed her crab shell to reveal a stunningly beautiful woman. The foster mother, in a fit of rage and greed, forces her own daughter into a similar shell, hoping to replicate the magic, but only succeeds in creating a monstrous imitation. The story culminates not with a ball, but with a visit from a prince who hears of this strange and beautiful girl. The test of identity is the same, a lost slipper, often made of gold. But the magic is intrinsically tied to the natural world and the indigenous belief in spirits inhabiting all living things. Mariang Alamango's power doesn't come from an external wand. It comes from within her own connection to the animist world. Traveling west to Vietnam, we find one of the most profound and complex variations in the entire Cinderella canon, the story of T-1A5M Calm. This tale begins with the classic setup. T-1A5M, the kind-hearted orphan, is persecuted by her stepmother and stepsister, Calm. They are cruel and manipulative, stealing her hard-won rewards and breaking her spirit. Her magical helper is a Buddha-like figure who appears from a group of bones specifically, the bones of a magical fish that her stepmother had killed and eaten, much like in the Xian story. This figure provides her with the means to attend a festival where she loses a shoe and is found by the king. She becomes his wife, and it seems the story has reached its happy ending. But T-1A5M Calm continues far beyond this point, delving into a cycle of death and reincarnation that reflects deep Buddhist influences. Her stepfamily, consumed by envy, murders T-1A5M. But her spirit does not rest. It transforms first into a nightingale, then a golden persimmon tree, and finally a loom. In each form, she continues to bring beauty and comfort to the king, and in each form, her stepfamily recognizes and destroys her. This cycle continues until she is finally reborn whole from a magical fruit, returning to the king who never stopped loving her. In a final act of poetic and brutal justice, the stepmother and Calm are not just shamed, they are killed, and T-1A5M makes a traditional Vietnamese fish sauce, N-1, B0-1, EBCM-1AFM, from their remains, which she then sends to her stepmother's family. The story of T-1A5M Calm is not a gentle fairy tale. It is a stark narrative about the relentless nature of envy, the resilience of goodness through multiple lifetimes, and the ultimate, unforgiving karmic retribution for evil deeds. The shoe is almost a minor detail in a much larger, more spiritual epic about the soul's journey. Meanwhile, in the Indonesian archipelago, particularly in Malay folklore, another fascinating variant emerges. Often referred to as bawang merah, bawang putih, shallots, and garlic, this story uses these two cooking ingredients as the names for the stepsisters, immediately anchoring the tale in the domestic and culinary world. The kind-hearted sister, bawang putih garlic, is forced into servitude by her stepmother and stepsister, bawang merah shallots. Her magical assistance comes from an old woman she helps by the river, who rewards her by giving her a hollow pumpkin. When bawang putih discovers the gourd is filled with gold and jewels, her stepmother, greedy as ever, sends her own daughter to perform the same good deed. But bawang merah is rude and demanding to the old woman, and her reward is a pumpkin filled not with treasure but with snakes and centipedes. The story often ends there with a clear moral lesson about kindness and greed, but some versions incorporate the lost slipper motif, where bawang putih loses a shoe at a mosque or a festival, leading to her marriage to a wealthy man. This version highlights the strong community values and the importance of respecting elders, core tenets of Southeast Asian societies. The magic is earned through genuine humility and good character, not merely bestowed. What these three variations from across Southeast Asia reveal is a breathtaking process of cultural alchemy. The core Cinderella skeleton persecution, magic, recognition, reward remains perfectly intact, but each culture clothes it in its own distinctive garb. The stories serve as mirrors reflecting local values, the Philippine connection to nature spirits, the Vietnamese embrace of Buddhist cycles of karma and rebirth, and the Indonesian emphasis on community respect and the consequences of one's actions. They prove that the most enduring stories are not fragile relics but living, breathing entities, capable of adapting to new landscapes and speaking directly to the hearts of people worlds away from where the tale first began. This wasn't a case of a single story spreading out and being diluted. It was a seed finding different soils and growing into uniquely magnificent trees, all from the same ancient, powerful archetype. Yet as the Cinderella story continued its journey across Asia, it didn't simply move east to west in a straight line. It also traveled along the intricate web of land and sea routes that connected the continent, absorbing new flavors and motifs from the cultures it encountered. One of the most captivating and opulent stops on this journey brings us to the heart of the Persian literary tradition, a world of storytellers, sorcery, and splendid jewels. Here, nestled within the vast narrative universe that would one day be known as the 1001 Nights, we find the dazzling tale of Seter, the Persian Cinderella, whose story adds a new layer of mystery and grandeur to the archetype. The framing of Seter's story is itself a testament to the power of oral tradition. It's said to have been told by the legendary Scheherazade herself, the vizier's daughter who wove 1001 tales to save her own life and the lives of other women in the kingdom. This context is crucial. It places Seter's narrative within a tradition of stories told by a woman for a mixed audience under the most intense pressure to be compelling, meaningful, and utterly captivating. It was a story designed to hold the ear of a king, and it carries all the lush detail and suspense that such a task would require. Our heroine, Seter, which fittingly means star in Persian, is born into a world of both privilege and profound loss. She is the beautiful daughter of a rich prince, but she is tragically orphaned and left in the care of a cruel and envious stepmother. This stepmother, in a twist that deepens the persecution, has a daughter of her own from a previous marriage to a div, a malevolent demon or ogre from Persian mythology. This demonic lineage infuses the stepfamily with a supernatural level of malice, making them more formidable antagonists than their mere human counterparts in other versions. They force Seter into a life of servitude, banishing her to the kitchens and subjecting her to relentless humiliation. Her magical aid arrives not from a fairy or a fish, but from the supernatural world her stepsister is connected to, though in a benevolent form. In her despair, Seter prays for help, and her plea is answered by the shimmer, a magnificent mythical bird of immense wisdom and power from Persian folklore. The shimmer, often depicted as a giant bird with the head of a dog and the claws of a lion, is a protector and a guide in Persian epic poetry. It instructs Seter to sacrifice a sheep and use its organs in a specific way to create a magical baby lamb. This lamb becomes her constant companion and the source of her magic. When the demonic stepmother discovers this and kills the lamb in a fit of rage, the shimmer reappears, guiding Seter to bury the lamb's remains. From its grave grows a magical talking tree that provides for her and eventually grants her heart's desire. That desire leads to the story's most iconic moment. A grand royal banquet is announced, and Seter, with the tree's magic, is transformed into a vision of breathtaking beauty. The description of her gown is pure Persian opulence, but the true focus is on her footwear. She is not given glass or gold slippers. Instead, she wears a pair of exquisite sandals adorned with precious blue diamonds. At the feast, she captures the heart of the prince, but like all Cinderellas, she must flee at the midnight hour. In her hurried escape, she loses one of these unique blue diamond sandals. it is found by the prince, who is now consumed by a desire to find its owner. The search for the woman whose foot fits this singular, jewel-encrusted sandal becomes his sole purpose. When his messengers finally arrive at Seter's home, her stepmother attempts the classic deception, drugging Seter with a sleeping potion and presenting her own daughter. But the sandal, of course, does not fit. It is only through the continued guidance of the shimmer that the prince's men discover the truth, find the sleeping Seter, and the sandal slips onto her foot with perfect ease. Her identity is confirmed, and she is joyfully taken to the palace to become the prince's bride. In a final act of karmic justice befitting the story's darker roots, the stepmother and her daughter meet a gruesome end torn apart by wild beasts. The Persian incarnation of the tale is a masterful fusion of the universal Cinderella structure with the specific symbols and cosmology of its culture. The magical helper is not a generic fairy but the Simurgh, a creature deeply embedded in the national epic, the Shahnameh. The loss of a blue diamond slipper instead of a glass one reflects a culture renowned for its mastery of gemstones and jewelry, making the object of desire both uniquely beautiful and unimaginably valuable. Most importantly, the story of Seter acts as a vital geographic and cultural bridge. Positioned at the crossroads of the ancient world, Persia was a confluence of trade routes linking the East and the West. The presence of a mature, detailed Cinderella story within its most famous literary collection provides compelling evidence for how these narratives moved. They were not isolated folktales but precious cargo, transported alongside spices, silks, and gems by merchants, travelers, and storytellers along the Silk Road, each retelling leaving a new cultural imprint on the enduring, beloved frame of the tale. While the opulent Persian and profound Asian versions offer a breathtaking view of the story's eastern journey, the path of Cinderella into the heart of the Western world begins not in the elegant French salons we often associate with fairy tales, but in the vibrant, chaotic, and often brutal streets of 17th century Naples. It is here that we meet Giambattista Basile, a courtier and folklorist who collected local stories into a volume written in the Neapolitan dialect called Lo Canto dei Canti, or The Tale of Tales. Published posthumously in 1634, this work is a cornerstone of literary folklore, and within it lies a version of our story so raw and unfiltered that it reveals the darker, more complex human emotions simmering beneath the surface of the polished tale we know today. Basile's heroine is named Zezolla, and her story, La Gatta Cenerentola, which translates to The Cinderella Cat, is a startling departure from the passive heroines that would follow. Zezolla's journey begins not with innocent pity, but with a moment of shocking violence that immediately sets the tone. She is indeed a beloved daughter, doted on by her princely father. But when he remarries, Zezolla's life descends into misery under the cruel hand of her new stepmother and 6 stepsisters. She is robbed of her status and forced into the kitchen, her once fine clothes reduced to ashes and cinders. This is the very origin of her nickname, the cat who lives among the cinders. Her despair, however, does not lead to quiet weeping. Instead, she confides in her governess, a woman named Carmesina, who devises a ruthless and pragmatic plan. Carmesina flatters the stepmother, convincing her that a certain dress in a chest back at her country house would be perfect for an upcoming feast. When the vain stepmother goes to retrieve it, Carmesina slams the heavy lid of the chest down on her neck, breaking it and killing her instantly. This is a Cinderella who is not just a recipient of help, but an active, albeit horrified, participant in a murder plot. Zezolla is complicit. She does not wield the weapon herself, but she benefits directly from this horrific act, which is presented as a brutal solution to a brutal problem. As a reward for her silence and cooperation, the governess persuades Zezolla's father to marry her instead. For a brief, hopeful moment, it seems Zezolla's troubles are over as Carmesina initially treats her well. But this hope is brutally dashed when the new stepmother, now secure in her position, reveals her true nature. bringing her own 6 daughters into the household and casting Zezolla back into her life of servitude and humiliation. The cycle of abuse begins anew, made even more bitter by this profound betrayal. It is from this place of renewed despair that the more familiar magic emerges. Abandoned by her human allies, Zezolla cries out to the heavens for aid. Her plea is answered not by a fairy but by a flock of doves who direct her to a magical date tree. They instruct her to send a message to the dove of the fairies, asking the tree to provide her with magnificent clothing. She tends to the tree, watering it with her tears and caring for it with her own hands, and it becomes her personal enchanted wardrobe. When the king announces a grand feast, Zezolla asks the date tree for royal attire. It provides her with a dress so splendid she outshines everyone, including her stepsisters. The king is instantly smitten, but Zezolla, ever cautious, flees before she can be recognized. This happens not once but 3 times. On the 3rd night, in her frantic escape, she loses something far more personal and jarring than a slipper, a pianella, a type of ornate wooden overshoe or pattern, specifically designed for the filthy, uneven streets of Naples. The king's servant gives chase, but Zezolla is too fast. However, in the struggle, she loses the overshoe, and the king's man retrieves it. The king, now utterly obsessed with finding the mysterious woman, declares he will marry whichever woman the shoe fits. He hosts a grand trial, and one by one, every woman in the kingdom tries to squeeze her foot into the distinctive pianella. The search finally leads to Zezolla's home. Her stepsisters try and fail spectacularly, hiding their mutilated feet. But when Zezolla is finally pulled from the chimney corner and the shoe slips onto her foot with perfect ease, the magic of the date tree is summoned one final time. It provides her with even more magnificent robes, and she emerges transformed as the radiant woman from the feast. The king recognizes her immediately, and she becomes his queen, leaving her life of ashes behind forever. Basile's version is a crucial, missing link in the evolution of Cinderella. It acts as a direct bridge between the ancient, often morally complex folk traditions of Asia and the Middle East and the sanitized literary fairy tales that would soon captivate European aristocracy. La Gatta Cenerentola retains the visceral, gritty emotion of oral folklore, the raw jealousy, the brutal violence, the stark betrayal. It presents a world where justice is not always clean and where heroes can be morally ambiguous. Zezolla is not a paragon of passive virtue. She is a complex young woman pushed to her limits, capable of both complicity in murder and profound grace. This version refuses to shy away from the darker aspects of the human heart, making the ultimate magical reward feel not just like a gift, but like a hard-won escape from a truly ruthless world. It proves that before the story could be cleaned up for French courtiers and German children, it first had to survive the tough, unforgiving streets of Naples, and in doing so, it captured a truth far more compelling than any simple moral about kindness. It was a story about survival, but the story was not yet finished with its journey. To become the global icon we recognize today, it needed one more crucial transformation, a polishing of its rougher edges and an infusion of pure, breathtaking wonder. This final, defining metamorphosis occurred not in a dusty kitchen or a bustling marketplace, but in the most refined and glittering of settings, the French court of the Sun King, Louis XIV. Here, a sophisticated author and member of the prestigious Académie Française, Charles Perrault, would hear these old folk tales and see not just a story of grit and survival, but an opportunity to craft a perfect moral fable for the aristocracy. In 1697, he published his Histoires ou contes du temps passé, or Stories or Tales of Times Past, a collection that included his version of the story, which he titled Cendrillon. With this single work, Perrault didn't just record a folk tale, he fundamentally reinvented it, sanding away the story's dark, violent heart and replacing it with the glittering magic that now feels so essential to us. The most iconic of all his additions was, without a doubt, the glass slipper. In every version that came before, the footwear was something tangible and valuable. A rose-red golden sandal, a gilded slipper, a pianella of wood and leather. But Perrault, in a stroke of genius, made it fantastical. A slipper made of glass is utterly impractical. It is fragile, transparent, and exquisitely beautiful. It serves no purpose other than to be looked at and admired. This was no longer just a shoe. It was a perfect metaphor for Cinderella's own unique and delicate quality, something so rare and pure that only she could possess it. It is worth pausing here on a famous and tantalizing theory about its origin. The French word for glass is verre. The old French word for squirrel fur, a prized material for lining luxurious garments, is verre. The two words are homophones. They sound exactly the same. The theory suggests that Perrault, or the oral tradition before him, may have originally described a slipper of verre, a sensible though still luxurious item, and that a later transcription error or linguistic shift changed it to the miraculous verre or glass. While scholars debate the likelihood of this, the very possibility adds a delightful layer of accident to the story's history. Whether by intention or a fortunate mistake, the glass slipper was born, and it captured the imagination of the world in a way a fur slipper never could. But Perrault's magic didn't stop at the slipper. He is the one who gave the world the archetypal fairy godmother. Unlike Zezolla's date tree grown with her own tears or Xian's fish bones born from her sacrifice, Perrault's magic is bestowed by a benevolent, external, and grandmotherly figure who appears precisely when needed. She is the embodiment of graceful, effortless magic. With a few waves of her wand, she transforms the mundane into the magnificent, turning a pumpkin into a gilded coach, mice into elegant horses, a lizard into a footman, and rats into coachmen. This was a magic designed to delight and astonish, a spectacle fit for a court that adored ballet and theater. It removed all traces of the visceral struggle and personal effort found in earlier versions, replacing it with a sense of divine, graceful favor. And with this breathtaking gift came the famous stipulation: the magic would only last until midnight. This ticking clock introduced a new, powerful source of suspense and narrative drive. The midnight deadline is the engine of the story's most dramatic moment: the frantic flight, the loss of the slipper, the mysterious disappearance. It creates a sense of urgency and wonder that simply didn't exist before. Most importantly, Perrault fundamentally rewrote the character of Cinderella herself. He scrubbed her clean of any moral complexity. Gone is Zezolla's complicity in murder. Gone is the raw hunger for justice. His Cendrillon is passive, patient, and pious to a fault. Her virtue is her only weapon. She bears her abuse with gentle resignation and never once seeks revenge. Even when her stepsisters beg her forgiveness at the story's end, she readily grants it, demonstrating a flawless, almost superhuman magnanimity. Perrault concludes his tale with two explicit morals, making his didactic purpose crystal clear. The first states that graciousness is more valuable than beauty, and the second, more famously, that personal charm and the attention of a powerful godmother are utterly indispensable for success. This was a story carefully calibrated for the young ladies of the French court, teaching them that patience, grace, and good manners, and perhaps the right patronage, would ultimately be rewarded with a lofty marriage. Charles Perrault's Cendrillon effectively gentrified the folktale. He took a story born in ashes and blood and polished it into a dazzling diamond of a fairy tale, one whose brilliant, crystalline facets would go on to reflect the dreams of the Western world for centuries to come, setting the standard for everything that followed. Yet even as Perrault's elegant Cendrillon charmed the French salons, an entirely different, darker version of the tale was being gathered from the oral traditions of the German countryside, a version that would preserve the story's ancient, visceral roots. Just over a century after Perrault, two brothers, Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm, began collecting folk tales from peasants and villagers, driven by a romantic, nationalist desire to preserve the pure, unvarnished voice of the German Volk. Their version, published in 1812 and titled Aschenputtel, is a stark, brutal, and psychologically profound counterpoint to the French court's sparkling fantasy. It pulls the story back from the ballroom and into the soil, the grave, and the raw, unforgiving landscape of the human heart. The very name offers a clue to its stark nature. Aschenputtel doesn't evoke the delicate cinders of a fireplace. Ash means ash, the grey, powdery residue of something completely burned away. This is a girl who doesn't just sleep near the hearth. She rolls in the ashes of her own extinguished life, a symbol of utter degradation and mourning. Her suffering is more profound, her oppression more absolute. But unlike Perrault's passive heroine, the Grimm's Aschenputtel is active in her own salvation, and her magic is deeply personal, born from a sacred connection to the mother she has lost. This connection is established in the story's haunting opening. On her deathbed, Aschenputtel's mother gives her a final command: "Remain pious and good, and I will look down on you from heaven and be near you." She then dies and is buried in the family garden. This moment establishes the central, somber theme. The bond between mother and daughter transcends death itself. Aschenputtel's father soon remarries a cruel woman with 2 vicious daughters, and the persecution begins. They strip her of her clothes, force her into rags, and banish her to the kitchen. Every day, they mock her by throwing lentils into the ashes of the hearth, forcing her to sort them out again, a seemingly impossible task designed to break her spirit. But this is where her mother's promise becomes real. Aschenputtel doesn't call for a fairy godmother. She goes out to her mother's grave beneath the hazel tree she had planted there with her own tears, and she cries out her despair. In response, a pair of white doves and sometimes other birds from heaven descend to help her. They swiftly and miraculously sort the lentils from the ashes, completing the task. This is not a whimsical magic, it is a sacred intervention, a direct answer from her mother's spirit, channeled through the natural world. The hazel tree itself becomes a character, a living monument to her grief and her love, shaking down beautiful dresses and slippers for her when she needs them to attend the king's festival. The festival itself happens not once, but over 3 days, and each time Aschenputtel escapes her stepfamily's notice, flees the prince and returns to her life of ashes. On the 3rd night, the prince, determined to keep her, devises a trap. He has the entire staircase smeared with pitch, a sticky tar. As Aschenputtel flees, one of her golden slippers, a gift from the hazel tree, gets stuck fast. The prince retrieves it, and the search for its owner begins. This is where the Grimm version takes its most infamous and shocking turn. When the prince arrives at Aschenputtel's home, the stepmother, seeing the immense opportunity, takes her first daughter into a back room. She hands her a knife and delivers a chillingly pragmatic command: "Cut off your toe. When you are queen, you will no longer have any need to go on foot." The daughter, gripped by ambition, slices off part of her own foot, forces her mutilated foot into the slipper, and limps out to the prince. Deceived by her determination and the blood filling the shoe, he places her on his horse to ride away. But as they pass the hazel tree on the grave, the 2 doves cry out a warning. Turn and peep, there's blood within the shoe. The shoe is too small, the true bride waits for you." The prince looks down, sees the blood, and returns her. The stepmother then takes her second daughter and repeats the horrific advice, this time suggesting she cut off her heel. The second daughter obeys, and the same gruesome cycle repeats. The doves cry out, the blood is discovered, and the prince returns. Only then is Aschenputtel, the true owner, brought forward. The slipper fits perfectly, and when the prince looks into her face, he recognizes his beloved. The tale concludes not just with a wedding, but with a terrifying and unforgettable act of karmic punishment. As Aschenputtel and the prince walk to the church, the 2 doves fly down and peck out one eye from each of the stepsisters. As they return from the church, the doves peck out the other eyes, leaving them blind for the rest of their days as punishment for their wickedness and deceit. The brothers Grimm's Aschenputtel is a world away from Perrault's genteel fantasy. It is a story steeped in the darker textures of oral folklore, where justice is not about forgiveness but about brutal Old Testament retribution. The self-mutilation and blinding are not gratuitous, they are symbolic. The stepsisters who lied with their eyes to deceive the prince and looked upon Aschenputtel with nothing but contempt lose their sight. They are punished in a way that directly reflects their sins. This version refuses to offer an easy, clean, happy ending. It acknowledges the deep, lasting scars of cruelty and suggests that some transgressions are so profound that they demand an equally profound and permanent reckoning. It is a story that speaks to a much older, more primal understanding of morality, one where the natural and spiritual worlds actively participate in delivering justice, ensuring that the ashes of suffering are finally transformed into the unblinking light of truth. This fascinating connection between the real Rhodopis and the world of ancient storytelling takes on an even deeper layer of intrigue when we consider her legendary association with another giant of narrative history, Aesop, the famed fabulist. According to some ancient accounts, including those by Strabo, Rhodopis was not just a slave in Egypt, she was a slave in the very same household as Aesop himself. Imagine that for a moment, two of the most storied figures from ancient folklore, one known for her rose-red slipper and the other for his tortoises and hares, potentially sharing the same roof, the same master, and the same oppressive reality of servitude. This isn't just a historical footnote, it opens up a breathtaking possibility of cross-pollination between two of the Western world's most enduring narrative traditions, the moral fable and the fairy tale. Aesop's fables are masterclasses in concise, pragmatic wisdom. They are short, sharp tales where animals act out very human follies and virtues, each story ending with a clear, unambiguous moral lesson. They teach about the dangers of pride, the virtues of cunning over brute force, and the importance of looking beneath the surface. The fairy tale, particularly a story like Cinderella, operates on a different frequency. It is a narrative of wish fulfillment, of poetic justice, of magical transformation that rewards inner virtue with external, tangible success. On the surface, they seem like different genres serving different purposes. But what if they sprang from the same well? The shared experience of slavery could have been that well. For both Aesop and Rhodopis, storytelling wouldn't have been mere entertainment. It was a survival mechanism, a way to process the brutal hierarchies of their world, to critique power without directly confronting it, and to imagine a reality where the underdog or the under-tortoise could somehow triumph. Think of Aesop's most famous fables. The clever fox outwits the majestic but stupid lion. The tiny mouse gnaws through the ropes to free the powerful lion who once laughed at it. The slow and steady tortoise defeats the arrogant, speedy hare. These are all fantasies of inversion, where the lowly and overlooked use their wits to overcome a stronger, often tyrannical force. Now hold that thought and look at the Cinderella archetype, a young woman relegated to the lowest possible status within her own home, uses not her wits but her unwavering virtue and a touch of magic to overcome her oppressors and marry a king. The mechanics are different. One uses cunning, the other uses goodness, but the underlying psychic engine is strikingly similar. Both are powerful fantasies born from a powerless reality, narratives that allowed slaves and the oppressed to dream of a world where the natural order was not just challenged but completely overturned in their favor. This potential fusion of fable and fairy tale in a single household suggests a beautiful, chaotic, and deeply human origin for these stories. Perhaps around a simple hearth after a long day of labor, stories were exchanged. Aesop might have told a sharp, witty tale about a fox and some grapes, offering a lesson on sour grapes and self-deception. And Rhodopis, or someone telling her story, might have followed with a more personal, yearning narrative about a slave girl whose beauty and kindness attracted the divine favor of an eagle and a pharaoh. One story offers a lesson for navigating a cruel world with one's intelligence intact. the other offers pure, unadulterated hope for a miraculous escape from that world entirely. Together, they represent the two most powerful tools of the human spirit in the face of adversity: pragmatic wisdom and boundless hope. The fact that these two legendary storytellers could have been contemporaries, even acquaintances, forever links the clear-eyed moral vision of the fable with the breathtaking, transformative magic of the fairy tale, showing us that the deepest and most enduring stories often emerge from the darkest and most constrained of circumstances. Yet as the Grimm brothers were collecting their tales of ash and blood from the German countryside, another, even more mystical and culturally potent version of the Cinderella story had been flourishing for centuries in the vast, snowy landscapes of Russia. Here, the story intertwines so completely with Slavic mythology that it becomes something entirely new, a powerful narrative where the hearth is replaced by the deep, enchanted forest, and the fairy godmother is supplanted by the most iconic and fearsome figure in all of Slavic folklore. This is the story of Vasilisa the Beautiful, a tale that preserves the core Cinderella archetype while weaving it into a rich tapestry of magical dolls, terrifying witches, and ancient pagan beliefs. Vasilisa's story begins, like so many others, with loss and a deathbed promise. Her mother, on the verge of passing away, gives her young daughter a final, precious gift, a small wooden doll. This is no ordinary plaything. The mother instructs Vasilisa to care for it, to always give it a little food and drink, and to seek its counsel in any time of trouble. With her last breath, she makes her daughter swear to keep the doll always with her and to never show it to anyone else. This moment establishes the central magic of the tale, which is deeply personal, domestic, and matrilineal. The doll is not just a tool, it is the literal embodiment of a mother's love, a sacred heirloom of protection that connects Vasilisa to her ancestral line. Immediately after her mother's death, Vasilisa's father remarries a widow with two daughters, and the classic persecution begins. The stepmother and stepsisters, jealous of Vasilisa's beauty and goodness, conspire to work her to death, assigning her impossible tasks. But each night, alone in her room, Vasilisa takes out her little doll, feeds it a crumb of bread and a drop of water, and tells it her sorrows. The doll comes to life, its eyes glowing with a soft light, and it performs all the arduous work for her while she sleeps. This magic is quiet, secret, and earned through devotion, a stark contrast to the public spectacle of a fairy godmother's wand. The story's most dramatic divergence from the Cinderella arc occurs when the stepmother, furious that her plans are failing, hatches a truly sinister plot. She deliberately extinguished all the fires in the house except for a single candle, and then sends Vasilisa on a perilous errand. She commands the girl to journey deep into the dark forest to the hut of Baba Yaga to borrow a light. Everyone in the village knows this is a suicide mission. Baba Yaga is not merely a witch, she is an ancient, immoral, and tremendously powerful force of nature. She is a cannibal who flies through the air in a giant mortar, steering with a pestle and wiping away her tracks with a broom made of silver birch. Her hut stands on giant chicken legs and spins around to face those who approach. Fences made of human bones adorned with skulls whose blazing eye sockets provide the very light Vasilisa has been sent to fetch. Sending a young girl to this creature is not just cruelty, it is a deliberate death sentence. Vasilisa's journey through the forest is a harrowing ordeal, but she is guided and protected by the doll in her pocket, which glows to light her path and whispers directions to avoid danger. When she finally arrives at the clearing, the description of Baba Yaga's domain is pure nightmare fuel. The witch herself arrives with a thunderous roar, smelling of the grave, and demands to know why Vasilisa has come. Terrified but polite, Vasilisa explains her stepmother sent her for fire. Baba Yaga, in her capricious way, agrees, but only on one condition. Vasilisa must become her servant and perform a series of impossible tasks or be cooked and eaten. She orders the girl to separate mounds of rotten wheat from good wheat, to separate poppy seeds from piles of dirt, and to clean the entire hut. These are not just chores, they are tests of her worth, her purity, and her spirit. Left alone and utterly overwhelmed, Vasilisa does the only thing she can. She turns to her doll. Once again, she feeds it, confides her terror, and falls into an exhausted sleep. And once again, the magical doll, the spirit of her mother's love, saves her. It summons a legion of ants to sort the grains and a gentle wind to clean the hut. Each morning, Baba Yaga returns, expecting to find failure and a meal, but instead finds every task completed to perfection. This both impresses and infuriates the witch. Intrigued by this seemingly ordinary girl who possesses such power, Baba Yaga begins to question her, and Vasilisa's simple, honest answers reveal her greatest strength, her unwavering virtue. She tells the witch that her power comes from her mother's blessing. At this, Baba Yaga, a creature of raw, ancient power who operates outside of Christian morality, nonetheless recognizes a power even she will not trifle with the sacred power of a mother's love. She declares she wants no one in her house who has been blessed, and she sends Vasilisa away, but not empty-handed. She gives the girl one of the skulls from the fence, its eye sockets blazing with magical fire, to take home as her light. Vasilisa returns home, the fiery skull held before her in the darkness. When she enters the house, her stepmother and stepsisters are stunned to see her alive. But their shock turns to horror as the skull's gaze falls upon them. The unblinking, magical fire, which Baba Yaga intended as a simple light, acts as an instrument of pure karmic judgment. Its light sees through their falsehood and cruelty, and it burns them to ashes where they stand, purifying the house of their evil. Vasilisa is finally free. She buries the skull in the ground to neutralize its power and goes to live with a kindly old woman in the village. It is here that the story finally rejoins the more familiar Cinderella path. While living there, she spins and weaves cloth of such astonishing beauty that the old woman takes it to the Tsar himself as a gift. The Tsar is so captivated by the craftsmanship that he demands to meet the artist. When he sees Vasilisa the beautiful, he immediately falls in love with her virtue and her skill, and he makes her his tsaritsa. The story of Vasilisa is a profound masterpiece of cultural adaptation. It takes the universal Cinderella skeleton and clothes it in the distinct soul of Slavic paganism and later Orthodox belief. The magical helper is not a foreign element but the spirit of the homeland itself, channeled through a mother's love and a simple doll, a common folk charm in Slavic tradition. The stepmother's cruelty is not just domestic meanness, it is an affront to the natural and spiritual order, which is why it requires the intervention of a force as primal as Baba Yaga to set right. The witch herself is not purely evil, she is a test and a threshold guardian. She represents the wild, untamable, and often terrifying forces of nature that one must respect and navigate with courage and purity of heart to emerge transformed. Vasilisa earns her happy ending not by being passively good, but by surviving a literal journey into the underworld and back, armed with nothing but her virtue and her mother's blessing. Her story is less about a magical makeover for a ball and more about a young woman's initiation into her own inner power, a journey that resonates with the deepest, oldest truths of the human experience. While the journey of our heroine has taken us from ancient Egypt to the snowy forests of Russia, the Cinderella archetype is not bound by a single gender. This story of transformation through virtue and magical aid is so profoundly universal that it effortlessly transcends traditional roles, demonstrating its true narrative power. Nowhere is this flexibility more vividly illustrated than in the Celtic traditions of Ireland, where we encounter a powerful gender-reversed variation that places a young boy at the heart of the classic tale. This is the story of the Irish Cinderlad, a narrative that preserves every essential element of the archetype while offering a fascinating new perspective on perseverance and reward. In this captivating version, our protagonist is not a girl in ashes, but a boy named Bican, whose suffering begins with the all-too-familiar cruelty of a stepmother. After his own mother passes away, his father remarries a woman who brings her own 3 daughters into the household. Almost immediately, Bican is stripped of his status as a beloved son and forced into a life of grueling labor. He is banished from the family hearth, given only rags to wear, and subjected to constant mockery and abuse from his new stepsisters. His existence is defined by his connection to the cinders and dirt of the fireplace, earning him the scornful nickname Cinderlad. His plight mirrors that of every Cinderella, the innocent soul persecuted within his own home, his inherent goodness overshadowed by his lowly and soot-covered exterior. But Bican's magical helper arrives not from a fairy or a fish, but from the pastoral heart of Irish culture itself, a magnificent, otherworldly bull. In some versions of the tale, this bull is a gift from his dying mother, a final act of protection for her son. In others, it is a creature he shows kindness to, and it pledges its loyalty in return. This bull is no ordinary farm animal. It possesses great intelligence and supernatural powers, becoming Bican's sole companion, protector, and source of solace. It speaks to him, advises him, and uses its strength to help him complete the impossible tasks his stepmother sets to break his spirit. This relationship taps directly into the deep Celtic reverence for cattle, which were not merely livestock but symbols of wealth, status, and even mystical connection to the otherworld. The bull is a powerful, masculine counterpart to the nurturing doves or helpful fish of other variants, its strength reflecting the different kind of perseverance required of our hero. The story's pivotal turning point occurs when the bull, foreseeing the stepmother's plot to have it slaughtered, instructs Bican to climb onto its back. The great bull then smashes through the gate of the farm and escapes with the boy, embarking on an epic journey across the Irish landscape. This flight from oppression is a dramatic departure from the secretive preparations for a ball, injecting a sense of adventure and raw survival into the narrative. The bull guides and provides for Bican as they travel, but it also knows its own fate is sealed. It eventually tells Bican that it must die, but that even in death, it will continue to provide for him. It instructs the boy to skin it and keep its hide, promising that whatever he wraps in the hide will be transformed into whatever he desires. After a sorrowful farewell, the bull dies, and Bican is left alone with the magical hide, a tangible piece of his loyal companion's power. It is with this tool that the story rejoins the familiar Cinderella path. News reaches Bican of a great festival being held by a local king, with games and contests to win the hand of the princess. Unlike the European versions where the heroine attends a ball, Bican's test is one of martial skill and athletic prowess, a direct reflection of the values of his society. Using the bull's hide, he wraps a stick to transform it into a mighty sword, and he wraps his own ragged clothes to become a suit of magnificent armor and a noble steed. Transformed into a mysterious, unknown champion, he arrives at the festival and proceeds to astound the crowd. He outperforms every other knight and nobleman, winning every contest and capturing the heart of the princess. And like every Cinderella, he must flee before his identity is revealed, losing not a slipper in his haste, but one of the magnificent shoes from his transformed outfit. The king, determined to find the mysterious champion, takes the shoe and launches a search throughout the land, demanding that every young man try it on. When the search party arrives at Bican's home, his stepsisters, of course, try and fail to claim the shoe for themselves. It is only when Bican is reluctantly pulled from the ashes that the shoe is tried. It fits him perfectly, and to the astonishment of all, he produces its match. He then uses the bull's hide one final time to transform back into the radiant champion, proving his true identity and winning the princess's hand. His virtue and perseverance are finally rewarded with a royal marriage that lifts him from the ashes forever. The Irish Cinderlad is a brilliant testament to the story's incredible adaptability. It proves that the core archetype is not about a specific gender, but about a universal human experience, the hope that inner worth, however obscured by circumstance, will eventually be recognized and rewarded. By casting a boy in the central role, the story seamlessly integrates the values of its culture: physical strength, martial skill, loyalty, and a connection to the land, while still delivering the same powerful emotional payoff. It demonstrates that the Cinderella story is far more than a single plot. It is a fundamental narrative blueprint, a piece of storytelling DNA that can express itself in endlessly creative ways, ensuring its survival and relevance for every new generation and in every corner of the world. Traveling north from the Emerald Hills of Ireland across the turbulent waters of the North Channel, the Cinderella story finds a new and distinctly solemn home in the rugged landscapes of Scotland. Here, the tale sheds the opulent gowns of the French court and the dark forests of German myth, taking on the stark, practical, and deeply pious character of the Scottish Presbyterian spirit. This version, known as Aschenputtel, presents a heroine whose suffering is quiet, whose magic is earned through devotion, and whose transformation occurs not at a king's ball, but on the hallowed ground of the kirk, making it one of the most culturally resonant and emotionally grounded variants in all of Europe. The very title, Aschenputtel, immediately signals a shift in tone. This is not a name born from whimsy or ash, but from a blunt description of poverty. A Aschenputtel was a garment made of rough, coarse cloth, a fabric associated with the lowest social classes and a life of hard physical labor. Our heroine owns nothing else. She is the youngest daughter of a widowed lord, and her plight begins not with a stepmother's arrival, but with her own father's misguided and desperate grief. In a chilling twist that reflects the harsh economic realities of the time, the lord decides he must remarry to secure his estate, but the only woman who will have him is a widow with daughters of her own, a woman of such renowned cruelty that she is shunned by all others. He knowingly brings this evil into his home, and almost immediately the new wife's true nature reveals itself. She strips the young girl of her fine clothes, gives her the rough Aschenputtel to wear, and banishes her to the kitchen as a servant, forcing her to wait upon her own stepsisters. The persecution is economic and social as much as it is emotional. She is reduced from a lady of the house to its lowest drudge. Her only solace and the source of her magical aid is not a wand or a godmother, but a beloved, supernatural creature from the pastoral heart of Scottish folklore, a small, beautiful red calf. This calf was a gift from her own dying mother, and it resides in the byre or cattle shed. Every day, in the depths of her misery, the girl goes to the byre and confides her sorrows to the red calf. And the calf, possessing a gentle magic, provides for her. When her stepmother, in a classic act of folkloric cruelty, gives her the impossible task of sorting a massive pile of grain from chaff, the red calf tells her to lay her head upon its flank and sleep. When she awakens, the work is done. This magic is quiet, personal, and rooted in the land. The red calf is a symbol of sustenance and loyalty, a creature of the Scottish farmstead that stands in stark contrast to the grand, talking bulls of Ireland or the glittering transformations of France. The stepmother, infuriated by the girl's inexplicable success, grows suspicious. She orders her own daughters to spy, and they witness the girl speaking to the calf. In an act of vicious jealousy, the stepmother goes to the lord and demands the red calf be slaughtered for their Christmas dinner. This moment is the story's great crisis. The lord, weak-willed and dominated by his new wife, consents. The girl is heartbroken, losing her last connection to her mother and her only friend. But as with Xian's fish, the magic does not die with the creature. As the red calf is led to its death, it turns to the despairing girl and gives her a final instruction. It tells her to take its bones and bury them beneath a specific stone near the hearth. She does so, weeping, and in doing so, she preserves a spark of its power. Soon after, the time comes for the greatest social and spiritual event of the Scottish Presbyterian week, the Sunday service at the kirk. The stepmother and stepsisters, dressed in their finest, prepare to go, but they deliberately sabotage the girl. They mix a peck of peas with a peck of ashes and command her to sort them completely before they return, another impossible task designed to keep her imprisoned in her misery. Left alone in her despair, the girl remembers the calf's bones. She goes to the hearthstone, and in her moment of greatest need, she finds not the bones but a magnificent set of clothing, a gown of silk and satin and a pair of the finest slippers. This is the transformation, but it is handled with a solemn, practical magic. There is no pumpkin coach, she simply dresses and walks to the kirk. The setting is profoundly significant. Her triumph does not occur at a secular festival or a royal ball, but at the center of her community's religious life. In the stark, solemn atmosphere of the Presbyterian kirk, her radiant beauty and fine clothes are not just for show. They are a silent testament to her inner virtue, a virtue that has finally been made visible for all to see, including a young prince who is instantly captivated. Yet, true to her humble and cautious nature, she leaves before the service ends to return home and change back into her ration coatee before her stepfamily returns. This happens for 3 successive Sundays. On the 3rd Sunday, in her hurry to depart and avoid recognition, she loses one of her exquisite slippers on the kirk steps. It is found by the prince, who has been determined to discover the identity of the mysterious, beautiful worshipper. He declares that he will marry the woman whose foot fits the slipper. His men take the shoe and travel from house to house, a search that culminates at the lord's estate. The stepsisters, of course, try and fail to force the delicate slipper onto their feet. It is only when the prince himself, perhaps sensing the truth, demands to know if there is another young woman in the house that the girl in the ration coatee is finally brought forward. The slipper fits her perfectly. She then produces its match, and the prince, overjoyed, recognizes her as the beauty from the kirk. In a final act that seals her triumph, she uses the magic once more, likely from the bones beneath the hearthstone, to clothe herself in the magnificent gown, transforming before their eyes from the lowly kitchen servant into a radiant lady worthy of a prince's hand. Yet this intriguing connection between a Greek historian and an Egyptian courtesan is only the beginning of the story. To truly understand the depth of the Rhodopis tale, we must look beyond the Greek accounts and venture into the very soul of ancient Egypt itself. For the story of a slipper, a divine bird, and a transformative royal marriage may not have been a foreign import at all, but rather a Greek retelling of a much older, profoundly Egyptian narrative, one steeped in the most sacred mythology of the Nile. The key to unlocking this possibility lies in the story's most distinctive detail, the eagle, and its potential connection to the very bedrock of Egyptian religion, the epic of Isis and Osiris. Recall the pivotal moment in Strabo's account. An eagle, the sacred animal of the Greek god Zeus, swoops down, snatches Rhodopis's rose-red sandal, and delivers it to the pharaoh. For a Greek audience, this made perfect sense. The eagle was a well-known symbol of Zeus, his messenger and companion. But if this story was indeed circulating in Egypt long before Strabo wrote it down, would an Egyptian storyteller have chosen an eagle? Almost certainly not. In the Egyptian sky, the most powerful, significant, and divine bird was not the eagle but the falcon. The falcon was the sacred animal of Horus, the sky god, the divine son of Isis and Osiris, and the living embodiment of the pharaoh himself. Every pharaoh was considered the earthly incarnation of Horus. It is incredibly plausible that in an original Egyptian version of this tale, the bird that acted as the divine messenger was not an eagle of Zeus but a falcon of Horus. A Greek listener or writer unfamiliar with the nuance might have simply substituted the bird of their own chief god for the bird of the Egyptian one, effectively translating the story's divine agent for a new audience. This simple substitution would instantly recontextualize the entire event, transforming it from a curious Greek anecdote into a powerful act of divine Egyptian will, with the falcon of Horus delivering a sign directly to his own earthly representative, the Pharaoh. This potential connection to Horus opens the door to an even more profound parallel, the myth of Isis and Osiris. This was the central, defining myth of ancient Egypt, a story of death, resurrection, and divine kingship that every Egyptian knew. Osiris, the wise and good king, is murdered and dismembered by his jealous brother Set. His wife and sister, Isis, the great magician and devoted mother, embarks on a desperate quest to gather the scattered pieces of his body to restore him to life. She successfully finds every part except one, and through her powerful magic, she is able to conceive a child, Horus, who grows up to avenge his father and reclaim the throne. Now consider the Rhodopis story through this lens. We have a woman fragmented from her rightful place in society, a piece of herself, her sandal, scattered and lost. This lost object is found and delivered by a divine force, potentially the falcon of Horus, to the king, who then becomes obsessed with restoring the whole, with making the fragmented woman complete again by finding her and elevating her to her rightful status as queen. The parallels are striking. Rhodopis' journey from fragmentation to wholeness, facilitated by a divine bird and culminating in royal marriage, powerfully echoes Isis's quest to reassemble Osiris and re-establish divine order on earth. The sandal becomes a symbolic stand-in for the missing part of the body, and the pharaoh becomes the agent of restoration. Furthermore, the concept of a sandal held deep symbolic significance in Egyptian culture that a Greek might have missed entirely. Sandals were not merely footwear, they were potent symbols of power, journey, and even sexuality. In Egyptian art, a sandal could represent the path of life or the footprint of a god. More specifically, there is an entire genre of ancient Egyptian love poetry where a sandal is used as a metaphor for intimate contact and longing. In one poem, a lover says, "I will not let her go. I will make her sandal into my shoulder cloak." The sandal is an object that touches an intimate part of the body, making it a deeply personal item. For the pharaoh to receive such an object from a god and to become consumed with finding its owner fits perfectly within an indigenous Egyptian understanding of symbolism and destiny. It transforms from a quirky plot device into a sacred token of connection. Therefore, the story of Rhodopis begins to look less like a simple folk tale and more like a popular, simplified echo of the most sacred myths of the land. It takes the grand, cosmic narrative of Isis and Osiris, of loss, quest, and restoration, and translates it into a human-scale story of social mobility and romantic destiny. It provided everyday Egyptians with a narrative where the gods could intervene directly in human affairs to reward virtue and correct injustice. A story where a twist of fate, delivered on the wings of a falcon, could lift even the most lowly individual to the highest station. The Greek historian Strabo may have recorded the tale, but its heart and soul, its divine messenger, its symbolic object, and its theme of restoration beat with the rhythm of the Nile, whispering of Isis's devotion and the promise that what is lost can, through divine will, always be found. But the power of the Cinderella archetype to reflect the deepest values of a culture reaches its most poignant expression far from royal courts and magical transformations, in the rich oral traditions of the indigenous peoples of North America. Here, along the forested shores of the Great Lakes, the Algonquin people tell a story that strips the tale down to its most essential spiritual elements. This is the story of the rough-faced girl, a variant that moves beyond the reward of marriage to offer a profound lesson on true vision, inner worth, and the nature of the divine itself. In a village on the shores of a great lake live a poor man and his 3 daughters. After the death of their mother, the 2 older sisters grow vain and cruel, forcing their youngest sister to sit for hours by the fire, feeding the flames. Over time, the sparks and flying embers scar her arms and face, and her long hair is singed away. The villagers, seeing her damaged appearance, call her rough-faced girl, and her sisters mock her relentlessly. This setup establishes the classic persecution, but with a crucial difference. Her suffering is not a symbol of her low status. It is a physical manifestation of her sacrifice and duty, a testament to her endurance. Her scars are not hidden by magic, they are worn openly, becoming the central challenge of her quest. The object of desire in this story is not an earthly prince, but a mysterious, supernatural being known as the Invisible Being. He is said to be incredibly powerful, wealthy, and kind, but no one can see him except his sister. The village is abuzz with the news that the Invisible Being is seeking a wife, but there is a condition no ordinary woman can meet. To even be considered, a woman must prove she has truly seen him. This immediately elevates the story from a social competition to a spiritual test. The two vain sisters, believing they can win him with fine clothes and boastful claims, dress in their best buckskin and beads and set off for his magnificent wigwam at the edge of the village. When they arrive, they are met by the Invisible Being's sister, who guards the entrance. She asks each sister the same simple, devastating question. What is his bowstring made of? The first sister, guessing, boasts, it is made of woven willow. The second, equally arrogant, declares, it is made of stout sinew. Both answers are wrong, and they are sent away in shame, their vanity exposed as a form of spiritual blindness. They could not see him because they were only looking at themselves. Finally, the rough-faced girl knows it is her turn. She has nothing to wear but a tattered dress of bark and old, worn moccasins. She has no fine ornaments, only her scarred skin. But she goes to the shore of the lake and asks the natural world for help. The earth gives her a faded buckskin dress, the rocks give her shiny moccasins, and the water gives her a magnificent necklace of sparkling drops. Thus clothed in the generosity of nature itself, not by magic, she approaches the great wigwam of the Invisible Being. When his sister asks her the same question, the rough-faced girl does not guess or boast. She answers with the quiet confidence of one who has witnessed a miracle. His bowstring, she says, is the Milky Way, the path of souls across the night sky. The sister's eyes widen and she asks another question. What is the runner of his sled? The girl replies, it is the rainbow, the bridge between the earth and the spirit world. She has passed the test. She has proven that she possesses the true sight, the ability to perceive the spiritual reality that lies behind the visible world. She is invited into the wigwam, and as she enters, a miraculous transformation occurs. The Invisible Being becomes visible to her, and he is more magnificent than she could have ever imagined. But the deeper magic is what happens to her. As he looks upon her with love and recognition, her scars fade away, her hair grows back long and lustrous, and she is revealed as the beautiful woman she always was on the inside. Her inner virtue, recognized by a divine being, heals her external wounds. The story concludes not with a grand wedding announcement for the village, but with a simple, powerful statement. The rough-faced girl married the Invisible Being, and she never had to worry again. The Algonquin rough-faced girl is arguably the purest distillation of the Cinderella archetype's deepest meaning. It removes all the material trappings, the carriages, the balls, the glass slippers, and focuses solely on the core spiritual conflict. The test is not about the size of a foot, but the clarity of a soul. The reward is not social elevation, but a sacred union and personal wholeness. This story reflects a worldview where character is infinitely more valuable than appearance, where the natural world is a partner and teacher, and where the divine is not separate from us, but is a presence that can be perceived by those with a pure and humble heart. It is a powerful reminder that the oldest stories are often not about escaping our world, but about learning to see it and ourselves with truly clear eyes. Crossing the sea from the ancient landscapes of China and Japan, the Cinderella story finds a vibrant and uniquely Korean expression in the folktale of Kongjui and Patchui, a narrative that has captivated audiences since the Joseon dynasty. This version, while clearly sharing a common ancestry with the ancient Chinese Xian, is no mere copy. It is a story thoroughly steeped in the values, social structure, and spiritual beliefs of Korean culture, offering a tale that feels both familiar and strikingly original. The story centers on two sisters, but their names are the first clue to a deeper meaning. Kongjui, our heroine, derives her name from a gentle, melodious sound, often associated with the cooing of a dove, a symbol of peace and innocence. Her stepsister, Patjui, bears a name that mimics a harsher, more grating noise, immediately setting up an auditory contrast that reflects their inner natures, one of grace, the other of discord. Like Xian, Kongjui is an orphan subjected to the relentless cruelty of her stepmother and stepsister. They force her into ceaseless labor, demanding she perform impossible tasks like drawing water with a broken jug or weaving cloth without a loom. But where Xian's magic stems from the bones of a fish, a gift from a personal bond, Kongjui's aid arrives from the very landscape around her, embodying a deep Korean reverence for nature and the concept of Han, a uniquely Korean feeling of deep collective sorrow and resilient endurance. In her moments of greatest despair, as she weeps over her impossible chores, the natural world itself intervenes on her behalf. A frog may leap out to help her draw water, or a flock of sparrows might descend from the sky to help her sort a pile of mixed grains. This isn't the grand, renewable magic of fish bones. It is a spontaneous, compassionate response from the natural order to undeniable virtue and suffering. It suggests a world where heaven and earth are in harmony, and they will not abide such injustice, a core tenet of Korean Confucian thought. The culmination of the story arrives with the local festival, a vibrant public gathering much like the one Xian attended. Kongjui's stepmother and Patjui, adorned in their finest hanbok, leave for the celebration, once again giving Kongjui an impossible task to prevent her from going. This time, they scatter a huge pile of grains and order her to sort them all before they return. Left alone and despondent, Kongjui is once again aided by the heavens. This time, a heavenly envoy or a magical animal provides her with a stunning hanbok and a pair of beautiful embroidered shoes. She arrives at the festival, a vision of otherworldly beauty that captivates everyone, including a high-ranking provincial magistrate. And as the archetype demands, she must flee before she is recognized by her family. In her frantic escape, she loses one of her exquisite shoes. The magistrate finds the shoe and, enthralled by its beauty and the mystery of its owner, launches a search. His men travel from house to house, having every young woman try on the delicate shoe. When they arrive at Kongjui's home, the stepmother sees a final chance for her own daughter. She hides Kongjui in a large storage jar, sealing the lid to keep her silent, and presents Patjui. But the shoe will not fit Patjui's foot. As the magistrate's men are about to leave, they hear a faint, muffled cry coming from the jar. They open it to discover Kongjui inside. The shoe is presented to her, and it slips onto her foot with perfect ease. The magistrate, realizing she is the mysterious beauty, takes her as his wife, elevating her to a position of honor and security. Yet the story often doesn't end with a simple wedding. In many versions, the stepmother's jealousy burns even brighter. In a final, gruesome act of poetic justice reminiscent of the Grimm's tales, the stepmother sometimes meets a dark end, killed by her own wicked schemes, while Patjui might be punished in a way that reflects her own vanity and spite. The Korean Cinderella, therefore, occupies a fascinating middle ground between the spiritual depth of Xian and the visceral justice of the European versions. It is a tale that beautifully illustrates how a single, powerful story can be woven into the fabric of a nation's identity, reflecting its unique relationship with nature, its philosophical beliefs, and its enduring hope that even the deepest Han can eventually be resolved through virtue and a little help from heaven. Perhaps the most compelling power of this story lies not in its specific trappings of magic slippers and pumpkin coaches, but in its profound resonance with the deepest, most universal corners of the human psyche. It endures not as a simple children's fable, but as a powerful psychological archetype, a narrative that gives shape and voice to our most fundamental hopes, fears, and emotional struggles. At its core, the Cinderella story provides a symbolic roadmap for navigating some of life's most painful and universal experiences, offering a form of narrative therapy that has comforted and guided listeners for millennia. One of the most immediate and relatable conflicts is that of sibling rivalry, amplified to its most brutal extreme. The stepsisters are not just mildly annoying, they are actively malicious, representing the darkest manifestation of jealousy and competition within a family unit. For any child who has ever felt overlooked, unfairly treated, or pitted against a sibling, Cinderella's plight is instantly recognizable. The story validates that deep-seated sense of injustice, giving permission to acknowledge that such feelings are real and painful. But it then reframes that conflict, suggesting that true worth is not determined by the loudest voice or the most aggressive behavior. Cinderella's ultimate triumph assures us that the quiet, the kind, and the overlooked can still win, not by adopting the cruelty of their oppressors, but by steadfastly holding onto their own integrity. This familial conflict is almost always preceded by the profound trauma of parental loss. Cinderella is at her heart an orphan. Whether her mother has died, her father is absent or weak, or she is simply emotionally abandoned, she is a child navigating the world without the fundamental protection and unconditional love that a parent should provide. This taps into one of humanity's most primal fears, the fear of being alone and vulnerable in the world. The story gives a face to that fear in the form of the stepmother, but it also provides a powerful counterbalance. The magical helper, whether a fairy godmother, a talking animal, or the spirit of the dead mother, becomes a symbolic substitute for that lost parental love. It is the universe stepping in to provide guidance and protection when human caregivers have failed, reinforcing the hopeful idea that we are never truly alone and that help can arrive from the most unexpected places. Beyond the family dynamics, the story speaks directly to the universal dream of social mobility and recognition. Cinderella begins in the ashes, a symbol of the lowest possible social and economic status. Her transformation and elevation to royalty is the ultimate fantasy of transcending one's circumstances. For centuries, for people born into poverty, oppression, or rigid social castes, this narrative was a beacon of hope. It whispered that who you are at your core, your character, your virtue, your inherent worth, is more important than the station you were born into. It is a powerful rebuttal to a world that often judges by wealth, name, and appearance, suggesting that a single twist of fate, a moment of being truly seen, can change everything. This is why the moment the slipper fits is so electrifying. It is an objective, undeniable confirmation of value that cannot be argued with, bribed, or faked. Ultimately, the story's most enduring promise is the hope that inner virtue will be recognized and rewarded. In a world where kindness can so often feel like a weakness and cruelty appears to be rewarded, the Cinderella archetype is a stubborn, persistent argument for a moral universe. It insists that goodness, patience, and compassion are not just noble traits, but are actually powerful forces that attract miraculous assistance and lead to tangible, joyous rewards. This is not a naive optimism. It is a profound psychological need to believe that our actions matter, that the ethical choices we make in the dark when no one is watching are somehow noted and will eventually lead to our own version of a royal ball. The story endures because we desperately want it to be true. We need to believe that the ashes are not our permanent home, that our losses will be restored, and that our own glass slipper is still out there, waiting for the right moment to prove our worth to the world. And so we arrive at one of the most iconic objects in all of storytelling, the shoe. It seems so specific, so peculiar. Of all the things our heroine could have left behind, a glove, a ring, a piece of jewelry, why is it almost always a shoe? This is no arbitrary detail. The persistent focus on footwear across hundreds of variants, from the golden slippers of China to the glass creations of France, points to a profound and almost universal symbolic weight that shoes have carried in the human imagination for millennia. They are far more than mere clothing. They are powerful vessels of meaning, intimately connected to our identity, our status, and our very souls. To understand this, we must first step away from the fairy tale and into the practical and symbolic role of shoes in ancient and traditional societies. In many cultures, shoes were a primary marker of social class and freedom. Slaves often went barefoot, while citizens and the wealthy wore shoes. The type of shoe was an immediate, visible signifier of one's place in the world. A delicate, intricate slipper was the exclusive domain of the aristocracy, someone who did not need to walk long distances or perform manual labor. Therefore, the act of a lowly kitchen maid possessing such an item is inherently shocking and transformative. It is an object that simply does not belong to her station, making it the perfect piece of evidence to shatter the illusion of her lowly identity. The shoe is an undeniable, objective fact that contradicts her daily reality. It is a piece of the palace found in the ashes, a solid clue that cannot be argued with. Furthermore, shoes have been deeply entangled with marriage rituals across the globe for centuries, making them a natural symbol for the story's romantic conclusion. In numerous traditions, shoes were a central part of the wedding ceremony itself. In ancient Hebrew custom, the act of removing a shoe and giving it to another was a formal, legal gesture to seal an agreement or a transfer of property, including marriage contracts. We see echoes of this in the Book of Ruth in the Bible. In many Celtic cultures, the father of the bride would present one of her shoes to the groom as a symbol of the transfer of authority. Even today, the tradition of tying shoes to the back of the newlywed's car is a faint remnant of these ancient beliefs, linking footwear to luck, fertility, and the journey of marriage. So when a prince uses a shoe to find his bride, he is participating in a ritual far older than the story itself, using an object already steeped in the symbolism of union and contract to legitimize his choice and formalize their bond. But the symbolism delves even deeper into the realm of the spiritual and the intimate. The foot itself is a vulnerable part of the body, touching the ground we walk on, connecting us to the earth. The shoe that covers it is therefore a deeply personal object, molded to the unique shape of its owner's foot in a way that no other article of clothing truly is. A glove can be loose, a ring can be resized, but a shoe, especially in a time before mass production, had to fit perfectly. This makes it the ultimate test of true identity, a biological lock for which only one person has the key. This intimacy extends to symbolism of sexuality and virginity in many cultures. In ancient China, as we saw with Xian, the tiny, exquisite foot, and by extension the shoe that contained it, became the ultimate symbol of feminine beauty and desirability. To see a woman's foot or her shoe was considered intensely personal. The prince's obsession with the slipper is on this level, an obsession with the woman herself, an intimate fragment of her being that he possesses and seeks to make whole. This concept of the shoe as a symbol of the soul or one's life path is perhaps the most profound layer of all. In numerous spiritual traditions, shoes represent a journey. We speak of filling someone's shoes or walking a mile in their shoes, equating footwear with a person's path, destiny, and very essence. To lose a shoe, then, is to lose a part of one's intended journey or identity. The magical shoe is the perfect fit because it represents her true destiny, which has been temporarily lost or obscured by her circumstances. The prince is not just looking for a woman with a small foot. He is searching for the one person whose destiny perfectly aligns with the path symbolized by that enchanted object. The perfect fit is a moment of cosmic realignment where her inner truth and her outer circumstances finally, irrevocably match. From the rose-gilded sandal of Rhodopis delivered by a god's eagle to the delicate glass slipper that could only be worn by one, the shoe has never been just a shoe. It is a symbol so rich and so deeply embedded in our collective unconscious that it serves as the perfect universal key to unlock a story about discovering a person's true worth, hidden in plain sight all along. This transformation of the helper reflects a fundamental shift in how different cultures viewed the source of magic and justice in the world. In the oldest versions, the power to change one's fate doesn't arrive from an external, all-powerful being, but emerges from within the story's own emotional ecosystem, born from bonds of kindness, loyalty, and memory. Consider Xian's connection to her magical fish. This wasn't a random act of charity, it was a consistent, nurturing relationship. She saved her own meager food to feed it, creating a genuine bond. When her stepmother kills the fish out of spite, its magic doesn't die with it. Instead, its bones become a sacred relic, a direct line to a power born from that lost friendship. The helper here is a direct consequence of the heroine's own actions, a literal monument to her capacity for love in a loveless environment. Similarly, in the Grimm brothers' German tale, Aschenputtel's aid comes from the hazel tree she planted on her mother's grave and watered with her own tears. Her magic is an extension of her grief and her enduring connection to her lost parent, channeled through the natural world by the doves that represent her mother's spirit watching from heaven. This is deeply personal, earned magic rooted in sacrifice and emotional truth. This stands in stark contrast to the helpers found in the Celtic and Eastern European traditions, where the line between helper and guardian spirit becomes beautifully blurred. The Irish Cinderlad's mighty bull is more than a pet. It's a loyal companion that speaks, advises, and ultimately sacrifices its life for him, its hide retaining transformative power even after death. This echoes the deep cultural reverence for cattle as symbols of wealth and strength. In the Algonquin story of the rough-faced girl, there is no single helper at all. Instead, the natural world itself, the earth, the rocks, the water, provides her with what she needs, clothing her in its own bounty. Her transformation isn't about becoming beautiful for a ball, but about being recognized by the natural and spiritual order as worthy. Her true helper is her own pure heart, which allows her to see the invisible being not as he appears, but as he truly is. These helpers are not providing a one-time gift. They are partners in a journey, their power inextricably linked to the protagonist's character and their relationship with the world around them. The most dramatic evolution occurs with the introduction of the fairy godmother in Charles Perrault's 17th century French version. This figure represents a complete externalization of magical power. She is a stranger who appears precisely when needed, unrelated to the heroine, her past, or any action she has taken. Her magic is effortless, performed with the wave of a wand, a far cry from the personal tears and nurturing that powered the hazel tree or the fish. This shift reflects the Christianization of the folklore, particularly within the context of the French court. The fairy godmother acts as a divine, benevolent agent of providence, a clear substitute for the Virgin Mary or a guardian angel in a more secularized literary setting. She bestows gifts based on Cinderella's inherent goodness, rewarding her passive virtue and patience rather than any active striving. This magic is also spectacularly theatrical, transforming pumpkins into coaches and lizards into footmen. A spectacle designed to delight a sophisticated audience accustomed to ballet and opera. The help is no longer a quiet, personal solace but a public performance of grace, perfectly aligning with the values of an aristocracy that believed in birthright and divinely ordained fortune. The helper had evolved from a spirit of the hearth into a deus ex machina, reflecting a world where power was seen as something granted from above, rather than cultivated from within one's own relationships and actions. Yet this stark brutality, so shocking to modern sensibilities, was not mere gratuitous violence inserted for sensationalism. These gruesome punishments served as a powerful narrative device, reflecting the deeply ingrained cultural and legal principles of the societies that told these stories. To understand them, we must step outside our contemporary framework and into a world where justice was often conceived not as rehabilitation, but as a public, proportional, and poetic restoration of balance. The concept of lex talionis, the law of retaliation, an eye for an eye, echoes through these tales. The stepsisters' crimes were not simple meanness, they were profound violations of sacred social orders, the duty of care within a family, the rules of hospitality, and the very obligation to tell the truth. Their punishments, therefore, were not just revenge, but a cosmic correction of a moral imbalance they had created. The self-mutilation in the Grimm brothers' version is perhaps the most visceral example. The stepmother's chillingly pragmatic command to her daughters to cut off a toe or a heel to fit into the golden slipper is a masterpiece of folkloric horror. It lays bare the ultimate hypocrisy at the heart of their cruelty. They commit an act of extreme violence upon themselves in their desperate pursuit of a privileged social position, a position they believe will absolve them from ever needing to use their feet for labor again. Their ambition is so all-consuming that they willingly destroy their own bodies to achieve it. But the natural and spiritual world, represented by the doves on the hazel tree, will not be fooled. The blood in the shoe is the undeniable evidence of their deceit, a literal stain of their corruption that cannot be hidden. Their subsequent punishment, having their eyes pecked out by those same doves, is a perfect example of symbolic, poetic justice. They sinned with their eyes, using them to look upon Aschenputtel with envy and to deceive the prince with a false appearance. Their blindness is a permanent, physical manifestation of their spiritual and moral blindness. They are forced to live in the same darkness they tried to impose upon Aschenputtel's future. This theme of sensory punishment extends into other, even darker variants. In some Norse versions of the tale, the stepsisters do not merely lose their sight. They are forced to dance in shoes of red-hot iron at Cinderella's wedding. This punishment is a direct reflection of ancient Germanic legal codes, where certain severe crimes were met with execution by burning or being placed in a heated metal implement. The red-hot shoes are a brutal final sentence, but on a symbolic level they again speak to a flaw in character. Their obsession was with finery, with the external trappings of status symbolized by footwear. The story takes that very symbol and turns it into an instrument of their doom, searing away the vanity that defined them. Similarly, in the Vietnamese story of T-1F5M, the stepmother and sister are not just killed, their bodies are transformed into a fermented fish sauce, N-1, B0-1, 8 EBC-M-1FM, which is then sent to their own family. This act, while horrifying, is the ultimate karmic closure. They spent their lives consuming the goodness of others, literally in the case of the magical fish. Now they themselves are consumed, their very essence transformed into a condiment that sustains others, completing a vicious cycle of consumption and retaliation that leaves no room for doubt about their fate. These harsh endings were not just about punishing villains, they served a crucial psychological and social function for the audiences who first heard these tales. For people living in pre-modern societies with little formal justice systems, where abuse within a household could be a private, hidden torment with no hope of legal recourse, these stories provided a cathartic fantasy of ultimate, unambiguous justice. The real world was messy. Cruel stepmothers might never face consequences. The kind and patient might die in obscurity. The fairy tale, in its brutal clarity, corrected that injustice in the most definitive way possible. It reassured listeners that the universe had a moral compass, and that evil actions would eventually circle back to their perpetrators with perfect, poetic precision. The violence was a guarantee that the moral order of the world, once shattered by cruelty, could and would be violently, decisively restored. It was a dark comfort but a powerful one, affirming that no act of malice would ultimately go unanswered. And that very question of how a story like Cinderella appears in ancient Egypt, 9th century China, and among the indigenous peoples of North America, brings us to one of the greatest puzzles in folklore. How did it happen? Did this story spring up independently in the minds of countless storytellers across the globe, a universal daydream of the human spirit? Or did it begin in one time and place, then travel the world, being reshaped by every culture it touched? This isn't just an academic debate. It's a search for the very origin of story itself, and the answer, much like the tale, is a complex and fascinating blend of both ideas. The theory of polygenesis argues for independent creation. Its foundation is the powerful concept of the archetype, a universal pattern or symbol buried deep within our collective unconscious, as proposed by psychologist Carl Jung. From this perspective, the Cinderella story isn't a single narrative that spread. It's a fundamental human daydream that different cultures discovered on their own. The core elements, the persecuted heroine, the magical help, the transformation, the test of identity, and the reward, are such primal expressions of human hope and anxiety that it's entirely plausible they would occur to people everywhere. A young person feeling overlooked and mistreated by their family, dreaming of a miraculous intervention that proves their worth and elevates them to a better life. This is a profoundly relatable fantasy. The specific details, like the lost slipper, could be explained by the universal symbolism of footwear as a marker of status, journey, and identity. In this view, the story is like discovering fire or inventing the wheel. It's an inevitable product of the human mind grappling with universal social and emotional realities, which is why we find such strikingly similar narratives blooming in cultures that had no conceivable contact with one another. Yet, for every compelling argument for independent creation, there is equally powerful evidence for diffusion, the idea that the story spread from a single point of origin along the vast networks of human contact. When we look at a map of the oldest known variants, a tantalizing trail begins to emerge. We have the Greek Rhodopis in Egypt in the 1st century BC. Then, a few centuries later, we have Xian in China, recorded in the 9th century but likely told for much longer. In between these points lies Persia, with the story of Seter preserved in the literary tradition of the 1001 Nights. This geographic spread aligns almost perfectly with the ancient Silk Road, that sprawling web of trade routes that connected the Mediterranean world with East Asia for centuries. Merchants and travelers didn't just carry silks, spices, and gems, they carried stories. A tale as captivating as Cinderella would have been perfect cargo, a valuable piece of cultural currency to be traded in caravanserais and whispered in bustling marketplaces, adapting to each new audience it found. The nature of the shared motifs makes the case for diffusion even stronger. While the core idea of a persecuted girl might be universal, the specific plot device of a lost shoe that leads to a royal marriage is remarkably specific. It's not a common trope found in every culture's folklore. Its persistent appearance along known trade routes suggests it is a migratory motif, a unique story element that was so memorable and effective it was borrowed and adapted repeatedly. The changes in the story often reflect clear cultural translation. The Egyptian rose-red golden sandal becomes a golden slipper in China. The divine eagle of Zeus in the Greek account could easily be a later reinterpretation of the sacred falcon of Horus from an original Egyptian tale. The fairy godmother of France is a world away from the magical fish bones of Xian or the talking calf of the Scottish Ration Coati, each helper reflecting the specific spiritual beliefs and fauna of its region. This isn't random coincidence, it's the logical process of a story being naturalized, its foreign elements swapped out for local equivalents to make it resonate with a new audience. So, which theory wins? The most satisfying answer, and the one most supported by modern folklorists, is a synthesis of both. The deep, archetypal yearning, the hope for recognition and justice, is likely universal and polygenetic. This primal emotional core is what makes the story so instantly understandable to everyone. It's the fertile soil in which the seed of the story can grow. However, the specific plot of Cinderella, with its intricate sequence of a lost shoe found by a royal figure who uses it to identify its owner, almost certainly originated in one place and then diffused across the world through trade, migration, and conquest. This specific narrative framework was a brilliant, culturally transmitted invention that grafted perfectly onto the universal rootstock of human hope. It was a meme in the truest sense, a unit of cultural information that proved so incredibly successful and adaptable that it circumnavigated the globe, finding a home anywhere people understood what it meant to dream of a life beyond the ashes. Yet for all its global success, Walt Disney's 1950 animated film created a fascinating and complex paradox. On one hand, it introduced the story to millions who might never have encountered it, solidifying its place as a global cultural touchstone. On the other, its overwhelming popularity created a powerful, standardized version that often inadvertently overshadows and even erases the rich tapestry of older, culturally specific variants we've just explored. This process of cultural homogenization represents the final and perhaps most profound chapter in the story's long evolution. The film's genius and the source of its homogenizing power lay in its masterful simplification. Disney's storytellers took Charles Perrault's French literary version as their primary blueprint, smoothing away the story's remaining dark edges to create a narrative of pure, gentle wonder. The complicit murder plot from Basile's Neapolitan tale was gone. The brutal foot mutilation and poetic blinding from the Grimm brothers' version were entirely absent. Even Perrault's pragmatic morality was softened into a more general ethos of kindness and wishful thinking. In their place, Disney introduced something new, a Cinderella defined by a quiet, almost ethereal passivity. Her primary action is to wish upon a dream, and her victory is achieved not through any cunning or even the direct intervention of her mother's spirit, but through the cheerful, bustling magic of a somewhat scatterbrained but supremely powerful fairy godmother. The terrifying Baba Yaga, the wise Simurgh, the sacred fish bones, all were replaced by the comforting, grandmotherly figure of Bibbidi Bobbidi Boo. This sanitized, sentimental approach was a product of its time and a cornerstone of Disney's emerging brand identity. Post-World War II America was yearning for comfort, stability, and idealized domesticity. The film provided a perfect fantasy of graceful suffering instantly rewarded by magical intervention, all wrapped in a gorgeous package of instantly recognizable iconography. The blue ball gown, the pumpkin coach, the jaunty mice in their little outfits, and of course the glass slipper. These images were so brilliantly designed, so visually appealing, and so widely disseminated through marketing and merchandise that they became, for many around the world, the one and only true version of Cinderella. The sheer economic and cultural weight of the Disney Corporation ensured that this version had a distribution channel unlike anything that had come before it, reaching across continents through cinema screens, television broadcasts, and eventually home video and streaming platforms. The consequence of this global saturation is a double-edged sword. The benefit is undeniable. Disney gave the world a shared story. A child in Tokyo, another in Rio de Janeiro, and another in Nairobi can all point to the same animated image and understand they are part of a common cultural conversation. It created a universal shorthand, a story so well known it can be referenced and understood almost anywhere. This common ground can be a powerful tool for connection and a delightful entry point into the world of fairy tales for generations of children. However, the loss that accompanies this homogenization is significant. When one version becomes so dominant, the incredible diversity of other interpretations can fade into obscurity, becoming specialist knowledge for folklorists rather than living stories told to children. The profound spiritual lessons of the Algonquin rough-faced girl, who learned to see the invisible being not with her eyes but with her pure heart, are eclipsed by the simple message of dreaming a dream. The complex, cyclical journey of karma and reincarnation in the Vietnamese tale of Tila Tawanea 5M Com is replaced by a single, linear path to a royal wedding. The gritty, morally complex survivalism of Zezolla in Basile's Naples is smoothed into passive patience. We lose the specific cultural wisdom embedded in each variant, the Confucian filial piety of Xian, the Slavic reverence for ancestral spirits in Vasilisa's tale, the Celtic connection to the land in the story of the Irish Cinderella. Disney's version, for all its charm, offers a generic one-size-fits-all fantasy that is often stripped of the unique cultural textures that gave these stories their deepest meaning and resilience. This creates a subtle form of cultural imperialism, where a single American-mediated interpretation of a European story is presented as the global standard. Local storytellers and animators around the world now must contend with the Disneyfied version in the minds of their own audiences, who may reject a traditional local variant because it doesn't have talking mice or a blue fairy godmother. The authentic, diverse voices of world folklore are quietly drowned out by a corporate vision, however well-intentioned and beautifully made it may be. The global village gains a common story, but it risks losing the unique dialects in which that story was originally told, flattening the rich, uneven, and fascinating landscape of human storytelling into a single, brilliantly animated, but ultimately monochromatic plane. So after this incredible journey across centuries and continents, what are we left with? We are left with the undeniable truth that Cinderella is not merely a fairy tale. It is one of humanity's oldest and most resilient narrative artifacts, a story that has been breathed into life by countless cultures, each adding its own unique voice to a chorus that spans millennia. This isn't just a children's fable that was written a few hundred years ago. It is a living, breathing piece of our collective psychological inheritance, a story so fundamental to the human experience that its roots seem to touch something ancient and deep within us all. Its true age and universality reveal a profound duality. On one hand, the skeleton of the story is astonishingly consistent, built upon a universal human daydream. It gives voice to our most fundamental hopes, the hope that virtue will be recognized over vanity, that kindness will ultimately triumph over cruelty, and that no matter how obscured by the ashes of circumstance, our true worth will one day be seen and celebrated. This core fantasy of transformative justice transcends language, religion, and era. It is a narrative comfort food for the soul, offering the same cathartic release to an orphan in ancient China as it does to a child watching a cartoon in the modern world. In this sense, Cinderella is a global citizen, a story that belongs to everyone because it speaks to a hope that lives within everyone. Yet, on the other hand, its magnificent variations showcase the beautiful specificity of human culture. The story is a chameleon, adapting its colors to blend into every landscape it touches. It wears the rose-red gold of an Egyptian sandal, the kingfisher feathers of a Chinese gown, the magical hide of an Irish bull, and the rough cloth of a Scottish ration coatee. It is shaped by the values of the society that tells it. In the Confucian world of Xian, the heroine's virtue is her filial piety. For the Grimm brothers' Aschenputtel, it is a sacred connection to a mother's spirit. For the Algonquin rough-faced girl, it is the purity of heart to see the divine in the natural world. The story is never just Cinderella. It is always, simultaneously, a perfect reflection of the culture that is telling it, teaching its own specific lessons about everything from social class and family duty to spirituality and the nature of reality itself. This is why the story continues to resonate with such power today. It is not a relic, it is a narrative blueprint that we continue to use to process our own world. Every time a new movie, book, or play reimagines this tale, setting it in a high school, a corporate office, or a spaceship, we are not just repeating an old plot. We are participating in an ancient tradition, using this timeless framework to explore our own contemporary anxieties about identity, fairness, and belonging. We are asking the same questions that a Greek historian posed 2,000 years ago and a Chinese scholar recorded over 1,000 years ago. How do we endure injustice? Where does our help come from, and what undeniable proof will finally show the world who we truly are? The glass slipper in all its forms remains the perfect symbol for that quest, a fragile, beautiful, and unique key that has for thousands of years been unlocking the same powerful, enduring hope for a better, more just, and more magical world.